The nurse screamed first, not a loud, shrieking scream, just a sharp gasp, the kind that makes the whole fall silent for a second, like the air's been sucked out of the room. Julia was already standing beside her husband's gurney, gripping his cold, sweat-slicked hand when the nurse backed away and whispered, "It moved." "What?" Julia's voice cracked. "What do you mean it moved?" The nurse didn't answer. She was too busy staring at the left side of Daniel's face. His eye, to be exact. A single tear had slid down his cheek, except it wasn't a tear dot, it was legs thin, black, jittery. Julia blinked once, then again, but the image didn't go away. Something was climbing out of her unconscious husband's eye socket. Not blood, not pus, a spider, a full-grown one. 12 hours earlier they were laughing in bed. Daniel was imitating their grumpy landlord again, the one who insisted on weekly mold inspections, but never fixed the heat. Julia tossed a pillow at him, nearly knocking over the leftover Chinese food on the nightstand. "If he comes back tomorrow, I'm spraying him with Febreze," she said. Daniel chuckled, rubbing his temple. "Fine by me, as long as he doesn't." "Check the basement again. Place gives me the creeps." "You mean the furnace?" Julia teased. "Or the spider army?" "Both." They kissed, half joking about moving out for the 100th time. The apartment wasn't perfect, but it was cheap, and for two broke newlyweds trying to survive in Toronto, cheap beat perfect. Then Daniel's nose started bleeding. Not a trickle, a full-on stream, and it wouldn't stop. At first, they thought it was an infection. Their doctor guessed it might be orbital cellulitis, gave him antibiotics, but by the time evening hit, Daniel was slurring words, shaking, and unable to see from his left eye. Julia begged the hospital to take it seriously. They ran scans, found pressure in the orbital cavity, something moving, but what they extracted from his eye wasn't a parasite. It was a sac, soft, pulsing. Inside it were 8 more tiny spiders, alive. The attending physician turned pale and called for an emergency specialist, but the damage was done. By nightfall, Daniel was in a medically induced coma, his body convulsing from venom exposure. Julia sat frozen in the hospital hallway, listening to the arachnologist from UBC explain what they'd found. "There's a species of recluse spider, native to South America, but this variety had never been documented in Canada," he said. "It lays eggs in soft tissue, warmth draws them in." Her stomach turned. "So, how did it get inside him?" He paused. "You mentioned something about your basement, right? Where exactly do you live?" "It was always locked. When they moved in, the landlord said it was off limits due to structural damage." Julia never questioned it. Until now, when she returned home alone that night, she unlocked the forbidden basement door. It wasn't damaged. It was webbed, thick. Gray ropes of silk hung from the ceiling to the floor like a death curtain, and in the center, dozens of tiny, pale spiders clustered around a large, grotesque egg sac the size of a grapefruit. The walls had scratch marks, and beneath them, a line of pet collars nailed into the drywall. She stumbled back, heart racing. Her phone lit up. Unknown number. "You shouldn't have opened that door." The next morning, Julia went to the city records office. The building had been condemned twice, once in 2004 after a tenant died of undisclosed causes, and again in 2011 when an exterminator reported abnormal infestation patterns. But both times, the paperwork had been mysteriously closed, signed off by the same person, their landlord, a man who didn't own the building under his own name. He had 5 aliases. Julia's heart sank. The machines beeped frantically. Julia stood frozen as doctors swarmed Daniel's bed. They were losing him. Cardiac arrest. "Prep the paddles," she whispered through tears. "Stay with me." He didn't. But just as the flat line echoed across the room, his eye twitched, and something crawled out again. The nurse screamed, not because of the spider, but because Daniel's hand gripped hers, even as the monitor still showed a flat line. He was alive. No, he wasn't breathing, but he was moving. The nurse backed away, eyes wide. Daniel's body wasn't breathing. The heart monitor screamed a flat line. His pupils were blown wide, but his hand, cold, gray, was moving. curling and uncurling like he was waking from a deep dream. Julia stepped forward slowly. "Daniel," she whispered, hope and horror mixing in her chest. His lips parted slightly, not in speech, but like something inside him was pushing from behind his teeth. Then, from the corner of his mouth, a web string slid out, thin, sticky, pulsing slightly as it unspooled into the air. The nurse screamed. The machines behind her crashed to the floor as she stumbled back. 2 orderlies rushed in, shouting for security. Julia didn't move. She couldn't. She was watching her husband turn into something unrecognizable. Within an hour, they'd transferred Daniel to a secure isolation room. Locked glass, double doors, oxygen regulation. No one would tell Julia anything, except that he wasn't dead, but he wasn't stable either. An infectious disease team had been called in, but no one, not even the doctors, could explain why Daniel's body temperature had dropped to 84°F, why his blood was clotting in strange web-like patterns, or why his lungs were hollow but moving. Julia watched from behind the glass as his chest rose and fell, slow, mechanical, like an insect molting. She pressed her hand to the window. "Please, come back to me," she whispered. But as I twitched again, not with recognition, with something watching her from inside. Back at the apartment, Julia broke into the landlord's unit using a crowbar from the maintenance closet. It looked like no one had lived there for years. Dust coated the counters, but there were no clothes, no toothbrush, no food, just a laptop locked and a stack of letters hidden beneath the kitchen sink, all addressed to different names, but with the same handwriting: Blake, J. Hanlon, D. Reese, and another she'd never seen, Martin Vega. And every envelope had the same return address: Cordillera Bioresearch Facility, Bogota, Colombia. Julia's hands trembled. Colombia. Where that rare recluse spider had come from. She opened one envelope. Inside was a permit to import arachnid specimens for research and breeding. And below it, a scribbled note: Phase 3 nearly complete. Male host accepted embryo. Target. Timeline: 14 days until emergence. Julia returned to the hospital and demanded to see the infectious disease specialist. They refused. So she snuck in, stole a nurse's badge, entered the back corridor, and found the observation lab. Daniel's scans were on the monitors, hundreds of images, each more horrifying than the last. There were shadows inside his chest cavity, movement. The radiologist's notes were printed in red. Structures resemble egg sacs. Number unknown. Subject's nervous system overridden by foreign biomass. Brainstem activity altered. Recommend immediate termination. Julia staggered back. Terminate? They were going to kill him. Her husband, who kissed her goodnight just 2 days ago, was now a threat. A host. And no one had told her. Julia fled the hospital in a blur of rage and fear. She needed answers, not guesses, not horror movie theories. She needed facts. That night, she returned to the basement with gloves, a mask, and a flashlight. The smell hit her first, like rot and ammonia mixed with something sweeter. She swept the light across the floor. A hole had opened in the cement wall, roughly the size of a door, leading into dark earth. And inside, the floor moved. No, it crawled. Hundreds of pale spiders skittered across the dirt like a living tide. At the center of the tunnel was a twisted metal cage, and inside it, a human skeleton, wrapped in webs. A child's shoe lay beside it. Julia screamed and dropped the flashlight. When it hit the ground, the light shifted, and for a brief second, she saw a face at the far end of the tunnel. Not human. Not fully. It was him, Mr. Blake. But his eyes were spider black, and from his back sprouted legs, fused bone and silk, twitching like antennae. Julia ran all night. She didn't stop until the sun rose. She went to the police. They laughed her off. No one believed her, even with the photos she managed to take. The ones of the egg sacs, the cage, the research letters. They looked staged, the officer said. Halloween stuff. She knew she was on her own. She arrived at the hospital just in time to see the lights flicker. People were screaming in the parking lot. The building was on lockdown. No one in, no one out. Then the fire alarm began wailing, and black smoke poured from the second floor, Julia pushed through the chaos, used the nurse's badge again, slipped into the stairwell and sprinted up 3 flights. But the 3rd floor was covered in webs. Real webs. Thick strands like steel wires stretched across the hallway. Staff were trapped in rooms, pounding the glass, screaming. A nurse tried to crawl through the mess. Her skin was melting from venom burns. Julia covered her mouth and ran. Her husband's room was at the end. She reached it, yanked open the door. And inside, he was gone. The glass window had been shattered from the inside. The gurney overturned, the restraints sliced clean through. Only one thing remained, a message burned into the wall with acid. She's next. The lights went out. Behind her, something clicked, like mandibles snapping. Julia turned around and saw her husband crawling across the ceiling, upside down. His face was cracked and hollow, his limbs moving like a marionette. And inside his mouth, eggs. Hundreds of tiny eggs. Can Julia survive what her husband has become? Or has the infestation already begun inside her too? Julia didn't scream. She couldn't. She was staring up at the thing that used to be her husband, crawling across the ceiling like a twisted nightmare, head twitching, limbs cracking in wrong directions. His eyes were black and shimmering. His mouth was wide open, leaking eggs. She stumbled backward. "Daniel, please," she whispered, tears mixing with sweat. He twitched again. A strangled hiss escaped his mouth. For 1 second, his body froze, like he was fighting something inside himself. "Julie," he rasped. She saw it, a flicker. Somewhere deep in that infected shell, Daniel was still alive. "Fight it," she sobbed. "Please, come back to me." Then his face split, not figuratively, literally. A crack tore down his cheek as something pushed out from behind the skin. His neck bulged, his spine rippled, and Julia ran. She didn't stop running. The hospital was chaos. Webs stretched across the halls. The elevator was flooded with silk. A patient's body hung upside down from the ceiling, blood dripping into the fluorescent lights. Julia sprinted down the stairs, slipped on the last step, slammed into the ground, and kept going. She burst into the parking lot, gasping for air. People were screaming. Phones weren't working. No one believed what they were seeing. She didn't wait. She jumped into a stranger's unlocked pickup truck and drove, barefoot, trembling, covered in spiderweb residue, until the hospital disappeared in her rearview mirror. What was he becoming? She drove to the only person who might believe her. Dr. Lynn Amar, a former biologist and whistleblower she'd found online while digging into the Cordy-era bioresearch files. He had once exposed a secret South American project involving gene-spliced arachnids until the lab was burned down and his name was erased from every database. Julia found him living in a cabin north of Vancouver, off-grid, paranoid. She banged on his door for 5 full minutes before he opened it. "You're one of them," he said coldly. "No," she gasped. "He was infected. My husband. Please. They're using people, breeding inside them." He stared at her, uncertain. Then he saw her wrist. It was bruised, swollen, a faint bite mark. His face went white. "You've got hours," he whispered. The truth about Project Arachnids. Dr. Lynn brought her inside. His home was covered in research, maps, photos, dissected spider corpses pinned to corkboards. "What's happening isn't natural," he said. "It's man-made, engineered." Julia clutched her chest. "Why?" He handed her a file. Inside it were photos of test subjects, human men and women, strapped to gurneys, faces half melted, eyes webbed over. Phase 1 was paralysis. Phase 2 was reproduction, Lynn said. Phase 3 is replacement. Julia shook. "Replacement? They're not just using us as hosts," he said. "They're making copies, hybrids, human exteriors, spider interiors. No soul, just instinct. And the ones that survive become breeders." She collapsed into the chair, holding her face. "Daniel," he was trying to fight it. Dr. Lynn nodded. "Some hosts resist, most don't." Julia whispered, "Can it be stopped?" He hesitated. "I created it," he admitted. The man who started the Ender. Lynn had worked at the Cordy-era facility 17 years ago. He was one of the lead geneticists trying to cure neurodegenerative diseases using spider DNA due to its regenerative and neural webbing potential. But the spiders they were experimenting on began to adapt too fast. They weren't just mutating, Lynn said. They were evolving, learning. One bit me during a test. I blacked out for 3 days. When I woke up, I could hear it inside me. He cut his arm open that day, pulled out an embryo, left the facility, burned everything, or so he thought. Blake, Julia's landlord, had been a security officer at Cordillera. He had stolen embryos, taken them to North America, started the program over. Why? Julia asked. For power, Lynn said. For control. Imagine replacing people in governments, hospitals, homes, quiet takeovers, silk and venom. Julia's own body was changing that night. She woke up on Lynn's couch, sweating. Her fingers were twitching, her skin itched. She rushed to the bathroom and turned on the light. Her pupils were dilated, pitch black. She opened her mouth and screamed. At the back of her throat was a thin web, stretching across like a second uvula. Get it out, she screamed. Dr. Lynn ran in, saw the web, and froze. You've got 12 hours, he said. Maybe less. He handed her a knife. You need to decide. Cut it out now, or become what he became. She gripped the sink, shaking. Can you do it? Lynn looked at her with sadness. No, but I can help you end this. Revenge had a name. Martin Vega. Julia wasn't going to die like this. She wasn't going to become a puppet crawling on ceilings, leaking eggs from her throat. She was going to destroy Blake, or whatever he was now. Lynn gave her coordinates. A cabin deep in the Yukon, where drone footage had picked up web clusters the size of rooftops. Lynn believed it was breeding ground zero. And Blake, or Martin Vega, as the original research showed, was there. Take this, he said, handing her a vial, neurotoxin. It'll kill whatever's inside you, but it'll kill you too. Julia pocketed it without blinking. She had already died the moment her husband did. The road to hell was webbed. Drive to Yukon was 6 hours through snow, silence, and dread. By the time she arrived, the sky was pitch black. No cell signal, no backup, just trees and fog. She followed the GPS to a clearing and saw it. A barn, wrapped in thick silk, hundreds of bodies hanging from the trees around it, husks empty, drained. She stepped out with a flare gun in one hand, the neurotoxin in her coat. Her veins itched, her vision blurred. Something was crawling inside her jawbone now. It was almost time. She walked inside. And then she heard his voice. Julia. She turned. There he was, not the creature from the hospital, not the man from the hallway, but Daniel. Howl, smiling, wearing the same hoodie he wore the night they laughed in bed about the mold. Come home, he whispered. She trembled. You're not him, she whispered. Of course I am, he said, walking forward. I remember our first kiss, the beach trip, the way you cried when your mom died. It's all still in here. She aimed the flare gun. If you remember me, you'll understand why I have to do this. He smiled wider, and behind him, the shadows moved, spiders, thousands of them. One shot, one choice. Raised the neurotoxin vial, cracked it open, drank it. Her body seized, fire in her throat, burning in her chest. Her eyes rolled back. The transformation was accelerating. She had minutes. With her last ounce of strength, she aimed the flare gun. Daniel, or whatever was pretending to be him, screamed. As she fired, the barn went up in flames. Spiders screamed. Egg sacs burst. Julia collapsed on the snow, laughing, crying, convulsing. She didn't feel the flames, not the heat, not the smoke curling into her lungs, not the stinging bites across her ribs. All Julia felt was weightlessness, like her soul had been ripped from her burning body and hurled into the void. Somewhere in the blackness, she heard his voice. Julia, you came back for me. Double quotes. No. That wasn't Daniel. That was what wore his face. The flare had worked. The barn was an inferno. She'd seen the egg sacs explode, heard the inhuman screams, seen Blake, Martin Vega, running through the fire, with legs bursting from his back. She'd swallowed the neurotoxin. She should be dead. And yet, she wasn't. She woke up in a cocoon, sticky, wet, tight. She couldn't breathe. couldn't move. Her arms were wrapped, her face half covered in thick web. Darkness pulsed around her. Was she buried? No. She could hear crackling. Fire. And something else, scratching, from inside her. Her body was changing. She screamed into the webbing, a muffled, choking sound. Then something sharp pierced her lower lip from the inside. She bit through. The silk spat out black bile and rolled herself from the cocoon. She landed in snow, soaked in sweat, wrapped in strands of death. And saw the barn, half ash now, still burning. Round her, hundreds of spider corpses twitched in the snow. She was alive, but not fully human. You were supposed to die, a voice echoed from behind her. She turned fast, faster than she should have been able to. Blake stood there, half his face burned away, one black eye bulging with rage. His mouth no longer moved like a man's. It clicked and twitched like mandibles. You killed my children, he hissed. Julia stood, blood leaking from her nose, her back arched in pain. No, she said. I killed your species. He lunged. She moved like lightning. Without thinking, without planning, her arms snapped sideways, and from beneath her fingernails, thin barbs of silk shot out like daggers. They pierced Blake's chest. He stumbled back, gasping. You're turning. She stepped closer. Then I'll use it. The last fight. They crashed into the snow, rolling across burnt corpses and charred wood. His claws slashed at her ribs. She headbutted him, wrapped his arms in webbing, and drove her knee into his cracked jaw. Blake was strong, but not smarter. Julia lured him beneath the crumbling beam of the barn, wrapped it with web, and pulled it down just as he charged. The beam crushed him, pinning him to the ground. He hissed, twitching, trying to scream. Julia picked up a splintered wooden rod from the ashes. Walked to him. And stabbed it through his skull. He didn't die like a man. He spasmed violently. His entire body split open. Dozens of half-formed spiders poured out from inside. Then silence. Only fire and falling snow. But she wasn't done yet. Back at Dr. Lynn's cabin, she collapsed on the porch. He pulled her inside, weeping with relief. You survived, he whispered. She nodded weakly, her voice barely audible. They're gone. The nest is gone. But her body was still changing. Her eyes were black at night. Her joints clicked when she moved. Her dreams were filled with silk. Lynn examined her carefully. The neurotoxin halted full mutation, he said. But some of it stayed. She sat in silence. What does that make me? He looked at her gently. Half predator, half survivor. Weeks later, the news broke of hospital fires were blamed on a gas explosion. The burned barn in Yukon was deemed an abandoned hunting cabin struck by lightning. The police didn't investigate further. No one spoke of spiders. But online, people whispered, swarms in Toronto. A girl found sleepwalking with webs in her mouth. A janitor in Alberta discovered hanging upside down in a school closet. Drained of blood. Julia watched it all unfold. From a distance, she wore gloves now. Her skin blistered in sunlight. Sometimes when she blinked, she saw things before they happened. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She was evolving. A new purpose-io night, she broke into a private biotech lab in British Columbia. She stole samples, files, footage of other nests. Then, she set the building on fire. Another night, she tracked a man named Dr. Torres, an old friend of Blake's, to a remote cabin and left him cocooned in silk for the wolves. She was hunting the rest of them now. One by one, her name had changed. Her face altered slightly, hair shorter, eyes darker. But she remembered who she was, what she lost, what she became. The final visitone evening, months later, she returned to the cemetery. Daniel's grave was cold, untouched. She sat beside it, whispering stories, laughed a little, cried. I wish I could have saved you. A wind rustled the trees. She took something from her coat pocket, a silver band, slightly melted, his wedding ring. She placed it on the headstone. I didn't let it win, she said. Then, she stood. Turned. And disappeared into the dark. Sometimes, the only way to survive what breaks you is to become something they can't break. It had been 9 months since the fire, since the barn. Since Julia killed Blake. and watched her husband's body burst with HATCHLINGS. 9 months since she changed, since she started hunting the others, but nothing had prepared her for what came next. The girl in the window, a quiet neighborhood, a new target. It was supposed to be just another mission. Julia had tracked one of the last remaining scientists, Dr. Sophia Karen, to a quiet street in Victoria, British Columbia, suburban, peaceful, maple trees in every yard, a front lawn with pink flamingos. Dr. Karen lived at house number 11. Julia had watched her for days, through stormy nights and bright mornings. The woman lived alone, rarely left, only received packages marked with chemical hazard symbols. All signs pointed to a new nest being developed inside. But there was one thing Julia hadn't expected. A little girl, a child that shouldn't exist, appeared at the window on the 4th day. Maybe 5 years old. Black hair and pigtails, bright green eyes, no whites. She stared at Julia through the glass. No emotion, no blinking, just watching. Julia blinked. The girl tilted her head, the exact same way Daniel used to when he'd get confused during board games. And then she smiled. Wide to wide, with small fangs. Confrontation. Julia didn't wait. That night, she broke into the house through the basement. It was worse than she imagined. Silk everywhere, tanks filled with mutated spider embryos, blueprints for a hybrid birthing center, syringes with glowing venom. And at the center of it all, Dr. Sophia Karen, standing in front of a webbed cocoon. So you came, Sophia said calmly, not surprised. You kept going, even after the barn, Julia hissed. Sophia smiled. You killed Blake, but you missed something. She stepped aside. The cocoon pulsed. Then cracked. Inside it was a woman, but not human. Pale, slick, webs woven into her skin like veins. Her eyes rolled open. Julia saw her own face. A clone. We needed you. Sophia circled her like a vulture. We couldn't replicate the host's resistance, she explained. Until you survived transformation. You merged, you became stable. Julia backed up, hands trembling. You copied me. No, Sophia said. We grew you. Julia shook her head. I'm not one of you. Then why haven't you died? Julia raised her knife. The child from the window stepped into the room. Julia froze. The girl walked toward her, completely calm, and reached for Julia's hand. Her skin was soft, human. Mommy, the girl whispered. A choice no one should have to make. Alia recoiled. No, she said. You're not mine. She's part of you, Sophia said. Half host, half you, a new species. The girl's eyes shifted from green to black. Julia remembered something Daniel once told her. If we ever had a daughter, I hope she gets your eyes. Her knees buckled. I didn't agree to this. You didn't have to, Sophia said coldly. You survived. That made you ours. The cocoon behind her ripped open. The Julia clone stepped out, smiling with her same dimples, same scars, same voice. Let's go home. Fire again. Julia had only one option. She triggered the explosives she'd planted earlier. A homemade cocktail of lithium batteries, gas, and pressure valves. The basement lit up in a flash. She grabbed the girl, instinct, not logic, and ran. Through the flames, web cracking around her. Sophia screamed behind her. The clone lunged, but too late. The building collapsed in on itself, swallowing the lab, the clone, the horrors. Julia and the child tumbled into the snow outside, coughing, bleeding, alive. Again. The truth about the child. 2 days passed. Julia sat by a small fire in the woods, the girl wrapped in a thermal blanket, sipping broth. She hadn't spoken much, just sat, watching, breathing. Julia studied her. Every movement, every blink. Her voice was human, but when she cried, it sounded like 2 sounds at once. Julia leaned in. Do you know what you are? The girl nodded. They called me Alpha, she whispered. But I like Emily. Julia's heart ached. Why me? She asked. Because you didn't die, Emily said. You became stronger, and I'm what comes after. A future no one can predict. Julia didn't sleep that night. She stared at the stars, at the fire, at the girl sleeping beside her. Was she a mother now, a protector, or a jailer? She couldn't kill her, not yet. And maybe Emily wasn't a monster, not yet. But something darker stirred in Julia's chest, a whisper she couldn't silence. What if Emily was meant to outlive them all? What if Sophia was right? What if this child wasn't the end, but the beginning? 6 weeks later, a hiker found something in the mountains of Banff, a silk-wrapped cocoon. Inside, a man, still breathing, but paralyzed. Next to him, a drawing, hand-sketched by a child, a picture of a spider with human eyes, and a note, "Don't hurt her. She's learning. She's mine." The end.